Okay, this is lesson 5.1 on properties of parallelograms. The objectives for this lesson is to be able to identify properties of a parallelogram and then to use these properties to find values of variables. So before we can do that, the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a quadrilateral. And a quadrilateral, we get an idea from its name of what it is. It starts with the word quad, which means four. And lateral kind of talks about the lines. So this is going to be a four-sided shape. So that's what a quadrilateral is. A type of quadrilateral is a parallelogram, and a parallelogram has two pairs of parallel lines. An example would be like this, where the top line is parallel to the bottom and the two sides are parallel to each other as well. A few properties of parallelograms is if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its opposite sides are congruent. So the top is congruent to the bottom, and the two sides are congruent to each other. Another property about parallelograms is its opposite angles are also congruent. So any angles that are opposite of each other are congruent to each other. Using that information, we are going to go over example 1. We are going to find the value of x and y. Well, in the last part, we were told that opposite sides in a parallelogram are congruent to each other. So we know x plus 6 is going to be equal to 13. And when we solve for x, we're just going to subtract 6 on both sides, and we'll get x equals 7. We were also told in the last part of our notes that opposite angles are congruent to each other. So the second part of this problem, we just have to put y is equal to 68. And we don't need to solve anything for that one. At this time, you should use these two examples to complete the next two on your own and then hit play to check your answers just to see how you're doing so far. So if you've already done example 2, you should have put these two expressions that equal to each other. So we have 2x plus 15 equals x plus 15. And we can subtract x from both sides. And we get x plus 15 equals 15. Then we'll subtract 15 on both sides. And in the end, you should have got x equals 0, which doesn't happen often, but that is an okay answer to get. And if we plugged it back in, we could figure out the side lengths, but it doesn't ask us to do that. We are just asked to find the value of x. And then if you've already done example 3, you should have set the two angles equal to each other because they are opposites. So you could have had 5x minus 9 equals 3x plus 11. And when you were solving, you could have subtracted 3x on both sides, which would give us 2x minus 9 equals 11. Add 9. 2x equals 20. And our last step, to divide by 2. And our final answer would be x equals 10. So if you didn't get those two correct, you can pause it and copy down the work so that you have it correct on your notes. The last two properties of parallelograms that we're going to talk about are listed here. If a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its consecutive angles, and consecutive means right next to each other, So if they are consecutive angles in a quadrilateral parallelogram, they are going to be supplementary, which again means they add to 180. And the last property of parallelograms that we're going to cover is if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its diagonals bisect each other. And a diagonal is a line segment from one corner to the opposite corner. Oh, spelled opposite wrong. So if you had an example quadrilateral over here, a diagonal would be like this, cutting it diagonally in half. So that's what a diagonal is. Okay. Now, knowing all of these properties, try example 4 to solve for x, y, and z, and then hit play once you have your answer. So to start for this one, we could have solved for x, and opposite sides are congruent, which would give us 37 equals 2x minus 3. And then you could have gone ahead and solved this problem, and we would have got 40 equals 2x divided by 2, which leaves us with 20 equals x. And what you could have done next is 123 is equal to the angle across from it, which tells us y equals 123 degrees. And then the last part that we were told is that consecutive angles are supplementary. So L and K are right next to each other, which are consecutive angles. So we know that Z plus 123 is going to equal 180 degrees, which gives us enough information to solve for angle Z, which is going to equal 57 degrees. So if you didn't get those 3 answers, you can pause the video and make sure you get those copied down. Our next example. For this one, I am going to introduce it in this lesson, and then we are going to be practicing it in a couple of days in next lesson. But for now, we're just going to introduce it so you have an idea of what you are expected to do for this problem. For this, we're going to use a coordinate proof to show that the points represent the vertices of a parallelogram. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to plot these points on our graph. And when you plot them, you should label the letters for the points. For this proof, there are several different ways that we can go about this, but the way we are going to go over it today is the quickest and the shortest way to do it. So that is why we are going to use the method that we are going over today. So if you have your quadrilateral drawn, we can now go ahead and prove that this is a parallelogram. So one thing that we were told about parallelograms is that the diagonals, when drawn in, bisect each other. So you don't have to draw these in on your image, but it is nice to have the visual. So we know these are going to bisect each other, which means that they both are going to have the same midpoint. So to prove that this is a parallelogram, we are going to find the midpoint of both diagonals. And if we can show that the midpoint of both diagonals are equal or the same, then we can say that this is a parallelogram. All right. So the first one, I'm going to find the midpoint of RT. And remember when you're finding the midpoint, you add the x values from the coordinate point together and divide by 2. So we're going to have 3 plus 0 over 2. And then we add the y values together. And that would be 2 plus negative 2 divided by 2. Then we can simplify. 3 plus 0 is 3, which gives us the fraction of 3 over 2. 2 plus negative 2 is 0. So now we have the midpoint of RT. We're going to find the midpoint of US and see if that is the same. So if you want, you can pause the video and find the midpoint and then check your answer after you have found it. When you set this up, you should have put 6 plus negative 3 over 2, and then 2 plus negative 2 all over 2. And if we solve this, 6 plus negative 3 is 3 over 2. 2 plus negative 2 is 0. So what we have shown is that these two midpoints are the same, which means, therefore, and that's what these 3 dots mean, therefore, RSTU is a parallelogram. So for a coordinate proof, one like this, you have to show the work for getting the midpoint on the left side and show the work for getting the second midpoint. And then your final point for this would be the last sentence that you are writing at the bottom. So all 3 of these are important that you do to get full credit for this question on a quiz or a test. And the last part of the notes today is to list the 5 properties of a parallelogram. And we've gone over all of them today in the notes. The first thing was what we were describing a parallelogram as, and that was it has 2 pairs of parallel lines. We know the opposite sides are congruent. We also know opposite angles are congruent. We know the diagonals bisect each other. And the last one, I gotta look back up here, forgot off the top of my head. Oh yeah. We know that consecutive angles are supplementary. Knowing all 5 of these is very important for this chapter, so I'd recommend looking over those daily just so you get used to knowing what the list of characteristics of a parallelogram are. All right. So the last thing to do before you complete the homework is to please complete the exit ticket at the end of the notes. If you're doing paper copy of notes, you can scan the QR code to get to the exit ticket. If you are using the digital notes, you can just click the exit ticket link right here and it'll bring you to it. And it's just like 4 short, quick questions to see how much you understood from the lesson and how much you need to, I need to cover again with you. If you have any questions, just let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Have a great day.